Hey, how's it going, y'all? My name is Nick. Welcome back to the Sympathizer, chapter 19 this time around. Pretty short one. This episode, but really dense. Primarily, it takes place in just one location, one conversation for the most part. But still some really good stuff. We're going to do things the way that we've been doing it for the last 19 episodes. We'll go through a super bare bones summary, do a little bit more of a play-by-play where we get into the nitty-gritty of things, and then there's an idea that I kind of had while reading the chapter that I'd like to explore a little bit. The chapter itself is pretty dense, so I don't think there's a ton of kind of reading into the actual events of the chapter. Like I said, there's just kind of one idea that I had while going through it, making my notes for the video, that kind of interested me, and I figured I would explore a little bit. So with all that being said, let's get into our bare bones summary for the Sympathizer chapter 19. The Sympathizer is once again getting used to a new environment, this time a prison camp in Vietnam. The Commandant and the Sympathizer discuss his most recent draft of his written confession, and the Sympathizer is finally introduced, or reintroduced rather, to the elusive Commissar of the camp. So like I said, really short in terms of main ideas in this chapter. We get a lot of Commandant Sympathizer conversations. That's really going to take up the lion's share of our conversation today. So like I said before, this chapter is kind of one of the more dense chapters that we've gotten thus far. It primarily centers on the Commandant and the Sympathizer discussing the nature of the Sympathizer's written confession and the shortcomings that the Commandant sees within it. During the conversation, we glean information about the Sympathizer's living conditions in the camp, as well as the fates of the other men on the recon mission. Because this chapter is so dense, we're going to take our time to really examine the conversation that the Sympathizer and the Commandant have, and there's not really a tense shift the way that I theorized in the previous episode, but I would definitely say that there's a tonal shift from the last few chapters and from this chapter. It's a little bit less hopeful, I would say. The Sympathizer is not quite as well adjusted. He's in prison at this point, and he's been there for a pretty long time, as we see coming up here in a second. So we start the chapter with the Commandant being less than thrilled with yet another draft of the Sympathizer's written confession. The Commandant levies the criticism that the confession is a bit melodramatic, which is funny for the Commandant to be saying to the Sympathizer. He simply responds, though, that as prisoner and captor, it might be hard for the two to see eye to eye. Something really cool here I will mention is that the Sympathizer is talking about how the written confession is 307 pages long, and this chapter starts on page 308. So just a cool, kind of confluence of, situation. Maybe I don't really know how to describe the way that I think about this. I just think it's like a cool and interesting thing to kind of point out and to mention. The Sympathizer mentions that he has been in an isolation cell for a year since the end of the recon mission, writing and rewriting his confession to meet the approval of the Commandant and the Faceless Commissar that he has actually yet to meet up to this point. We also learn that the Darkest Marine, the Philosophical Medic, the Hmong Scout, the Lao Farmer, and Bon have all survived the mission as well, but they're actually being held in the barracks and treated as actual prisoners, whereas the Sympathizer is being held as a guest of the Commandant and the Commissar. Guests can leave, retorts the Sympathizer, when told once again that he is a guest of the officials, and the Commandant responds that maybe patient is more accurate than guest. We learn of the Commandant's history as a veteran of the war who spent the lion's share of 10 years fighting and living in the caves of Laos, and the Sympathizer mentions his classically good looks, which are unmarred by his years of fighting. The Commandant tells the Sympathizer that he must be kept in solitary confinement because of his deep exposure to Western ideas and the danger that this exposure poses to the other prisoners. The Sympathizer sympathizes with this, And we can start to see here the kind of cracks that a year of imprisonment have been causing in the Sympathizer. The Commandant states that when his confession is satisfactory, he will meet the Commissar, better known as the Faceless Man, due to his reclusive nature and the fact that none of the other prisoners, most of the other guards for that matter, have ever really seen the man too closely. We get some information about the layout and various functions of the prison camp next, with special emphasis being devoted to the areas for family visits and conjugal visits that the guards seem to enjoy just as much as the prisoners. The Commandant then launches into an attack on the Sympathizer, stating that every other prisoner admits to their Republican past, telling him what he wants to hear. The Sympathizer, though, still refuses to do so, and the Commandant wonders if that makes him very smart or very stupid. The Sympathizer says that he's smart in some ways, like having the ability to take the editorial criticism seriously, but stupid in the way that he is unable to see how the confession is still unsatisfactory. The Commandant replies that because his confession is not satisfactory, he is not able to progress to the oral examination section of his re-education process. After offering the Sympathizer a cigarette, which he desirously accepts, the Commandant explains that his confession is satisfactory in content, but not exactly in style. The lack of citing revolutionary figures, incorporating revolutionary poetry and literature, and references to revolutionary music and entertainment cast a shadow on the Sympathizer's written confession. The Commandant then chastises the Sympathizer's lack of filial piety, to which the Sympathizer stands up for himself a little bit. He says he talks reverently about his mother quite frequently, and his father is wholly undeserving of reverence. The two men discuss the synthesis of the Sympathizer's birth and the unfortunate nature of him being a bastard. The Commandant pours himself a shot of rice wine, and the Sympathizer once again licks his cracked lips. He opts for tea, though, as another form of showcasing his rehabilitation. And the Commandant mentions that the most frustrating part of the situation is that the Sympathizer is understanding and remorseful in person, but on the page he comes off as recalcitrant. The conversation naturally shifts to the living conditions of the prisoners, and a defiant Sympathizer advocates for himself as living as a mole for the revolution for his entire adult life. Unconvinced, the Commandant removes a piece of cloth that was covering a jar near the table that the two men are seated at. Inside the jar is the preserved corpse of a baby with two heads. The Commandant uses the deformed baby as a metaphor, I think, or maybe a symbol of the requirements of the revolution. I don't really know, to be honest with you. I read it multiple times to try and kind of figure out what the two-headed baby sort of symbolized or helped him prove to the Sympathizer. I'm not really sure. If you know, please drop me a line. Let me know. I might just not be smart enough for that one. The Commandant then launches into a diatribe about the fact that Vietnam is still healing and will take many, many years before the revolution has kind of fixed all the ills caused by the French and the Americans. The Commandant and the Sympathizer are interrupted by a guard bringing in lunch for the two men, and the Sympathizer then comments on the lackluster diet that the prisoners are fed with and the unpredictable bowel movements that this diet produces. The Sympathizer thanks the guard by saying, "Thank you, sir," and mentions that he is unable to call the guards comrade after a warning from the Commissar and Commandant. He mentions a cocktail of emotions here resembling a feline dependency and resentment, which I think is just really, really dope writing and just worth pointing out and, lauding when we get some kind of stuff like that. The Sympathizer considers his confession and the fact that he could probably shorten his sentence by saying the things that he's supposed to say, but he doesn't feel he really has committed any crimes outside of his westernization. Even the murders of the Major and Sonny go uncharged by the Commissar and Commandant. The only thing keeping him from his re-education being complete are his appreciation for yellow music like the Beatles. The Commandant offers a further indictment of the Sympathizer, saying that compared to real revolutionaries, he is just a communist by name. The Commandant says that he is just a bourgeois intellectual and he should remake himself as Uncle Ho and Chairman Mao had previously recommended. The Sympathizer rebuts by saying that communist literature wasn't really always made for the working class. Das Kapital, who's written by Karl Marx, a prime example, which goes over just about as well as you can kind of assume that it would. The Commandant erupts in anger and says that the Sympathizer has become an American, and his re-education will cease once he has become Vietnamese once again. The Sympathizer claims that his confession paints him as anything other than American, even going so far as to say that he's anti-American. But this doesn't really convince the Commandant, who says that reactionary politics are behind the party. Now, it does no good to consider oneself in relation to Americans, and they must now work on becoming 100% Vietnamese once again. The Commandant inquires as to whether the Sympathizer enjoyed the wood pigeon, which is a euphemism for rat, I believe, and then launches into another lesson about sacrificing oneself to save the group, and he kind of offers a chilling memory of dogs eating the brains and intestines of a battalion doctor. The meal ends, and the Commandant congratulates the Sympathizer on finally passing the written portion of his re-education, and finally invites him to come face-to-face with the Faceless Commissar. On the way to the Commissar's quarters, the Sympathizer reflects on the Faceless Commissar and the fear and reverence that the prisoners and the other guards hold for him. He considers why, if we are all comrades, should we fear one another and let paranoia rule our hands? Upon asking the Commandant during an earlier editing session, he responds by saying, yes, we are all comrades in this grand struggle, but there are certain levels of ideological consciousness. Foreign invaders, he says, can kill the body, but it is only you that can kill your own spirit. The Commandant and the Sympathizer share a brief goodbye outside of the Commissar's quarters, where the Commandant threatens him again with the final cure, citing his reactionary nature, addiction to alcohol and prostitution, and his obsession with yellow music. The Sympathizer thanks the Commandant for his tutelage, which seems to pacify his bloodlust a little bit. And upon knocking on the Commissar's door, the Sympathizer is greeted by a strangely familiar voice. The Sympathizer enters the room and is greeted by a banner saying, "Nothing is more precious than independence and freedom." He looks around and sees some familiar items, a guitar and a record player that looks suspiciously like the ones that he left at the General's villa during his escape. The Commissar parts the mosquito netting over his bed to reveal a badly burned visage with all features scorched away to leave shiny scars in their place. "Come now," the Commissar says, "am I really so horrible that you do not recognize me, my friend?" The chapter then ends with the Sympathizer and the reader realizing that the Commissar all along has been former communist handler and blood brother, Mon. Big reveal. Really, really good stuff. Like I said, super dense. A lot of communist ideology conversation, a lot of kind of political re-education stuff. Just dense. You know, not to say that it's not rewarding, not to say that it's not good, not to say that it isn't, not to say that it's not exciting. Is what I'm trying to say. You know, I think that the big reveal at the end is one of the more exciting kind of cliffhanger-y type ideas that we've had so far in the story. I think from the beginning of the chapter 2, though, you get, at least for me personally, I felt like I saw this coming a little bit. Even though, like, yeah, it's a huge surprise and it's an interesting development and all this stuff. It's something that I feel like I may have seen coming a little bit, but that's not to say that it isn't. It isn't a worthwhile reveal. So like I said earlier, because we devoted so much time and attention to the kind of minutia of the chapter, there's like an idea that I was having while reading the chapter that kind of was interesting to me and could potentially be interesting to you all. And that's the idea of the faceless man meeting the man of two faces. I think that it's really interesting that we're kind of being reintroduced to Mon as the faceless man after spending so much time dealing with the man of two faces motif. throughout the story, we're constantly confronted by the idea of duality and the reconciliation of presented versus actual identity. If you remember, Mon was really just as friendly with Bone during their blood brother days, so he was living sort of a double life as well, more or less another man of two faces. But with the transition of power, Mon is able to shed that mask and kind of become the outspoken communist that he always has been. As of this chapter, we don't really have any information about Mon's movements after the fall of Saigon, but his injuries kind of suggest something catastrophic has occurred since we last saw him. I'm kind of interested by the idea of Mon being badly burned by the cleansing fire motif that's present in the Bible. I think that that's kind of an interesting idea, and it kind of highlights his transition from man of two faces to high-level communist bureaucrat. The faceless man also is kind of the diametric opposite of the man of two faces. The faceless man is grotesque and offensive to all onlookers, while the man of two faces is kind of able to play to the crowd and present whichever version of himself is more palatable to the audience. I think that as we learn more about Mon's story and the events regarding his injuries and his movements following the fall of Saigon, we'll start to be able to look a little bit more closely at this idea and, really parse through all of the kind of implications of this theme of the faceless man and the man of two faces. And hopefully it turns out to be more than just an interesting turn of phrase. I think that there's a lot of really interesting stuff that can be gleaned from this kind of metaphor and this symbolism and all that kind of stuff. And I'm interested to see where the story goes following the kind of reintroduction of Mon and the Sympathizer. So, for the most part, I think that is all I have for chapter 19. It's a brief chapter. It's only about 13 pages, I think 13 or 15 pages, something like that. Kind of brief in relation to all of the chapters that we've gotten beforehand. Like I said, not really a ton happens in terms of events and excitement. It's a lot of conversation stuff, which is valuable and is interesting, and it's worthwhile to kind of get into the meat of these characters and really delve into their personalities and their kind of identities and their experiences. And I think that there's a lot of really valuable stuff here in terms of the Sympathizer interacting with the new life in the prison camp, and the Commandant and the Commissar, their relationship to the Sympathizer, his interactions with all the guards. I think that, this chapter is really good, and while not being quite as exciting as the recon mission or some of the other stuff, I think that it's necessary to kind of refocus our attention and act as a bit of a transition chapter from the past, which we've been kind of going through with a really fine-tooth comb, and set up the kind of present and future that we are getting into with the last few chapters of the book. Because after this one, we have 20, 21, 22, and 23, so we only have 4 chapters left until the end of the book, which means that this Let's Read will be coming to a close soon. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to do, obviously, a video for each chapter. We'll have 20, 21, 22, 23, so we'll have 4 more chapter recaps. And then I think I'm going to do kind of a looking back, like a review type session. There's some information on the publisher's website about book club stuff. I'm probably just going to go through the questions that they have written on the website just to kind of focus our ideas and focus our attention to the kind of themes and motifs and situations that the publisher finds to be the most valuable and important in terms of the book itself. I would like to continue doing this. I'm interested in potentially starting a second book club, or continuing the series with a different book. I'm kind of open to suggestions at this point. I have some books that I want to reread again, some books that I've read in the past that I'm interested in going back to and kind of re-examining. But I also enjoy the kind of new book experience where I'm learning, I'm going through and I'm being surprised just the same way as, as everyone else is when it comes to the events of the book. So if you have any ideas about a book that you're interested in maybe doing a book club for, or if you're enjoying the book club itself, let me know. Let me know if I missed something with this chapter. Like I said, super dense. I tried to make it a little bit more palatable. This one feels like a bit of a slog to kind of get through just because it is so much conversation and so much detail through conversation. And there's a lot of political ideology and stuff like that. So it can seem a bit dense. And so there's definitely stuff that I missed throughout the chapter. Feel free to let me know. I'll be happy to shout it out in the next one. But yeah, outside of all of that, I really enjoyed the chapter. I hope you did too. Thank you for sticking around till the end. I look forward to seeing you on the next one.